After college, I went into the military, and then I met my wife in college, and so she was going to law school at Willamette University in Salem. We moved down there. I went to community college and got my welding certification. I knew I needed a trade besides college wasn't going to do any good for me. And one day in the gym, this guy walks up to me and says, "Hey, you should be a cop." And I said, "I don't want to be a police officer." I said, "I got a good job, I'm making good money." And he hounded me for weeks and weeks and weeks. So finally I took the test just to get him off my back. I took the test, things went well, and I said to myself, I can always weld, but let me try this out. It seemed something new, something fresh. And Mr. D always told me, don't be one of those guys who complains, be one of those guys who wants to make change. I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. I lived in the projects of Newark, New Jersey. We lived in a project that was 20 stories high. We lived on the 19th floor, so the elevators hardly ever worked. So I had to come up the fire escape stairs. And when we come up the stairs, especially after school and things like that, you'd have to weave your way through the drug addicts and the prostitutes and some of the gang members to get up to your apartment. We didn't have a lot of guidance sometimes as children, male role models, but one of the male role models that I did have when I was about 8 years old, we used to think it was funny to throw snowballs into the buses when they were stopped because they had to leave their doors open for some reason. And so the bus drivers would sit there and wait, and when there was nobody getting on or off, we'd throw snowballs at the bus drivers. Obviously people would call the police and the police would arrive. We would run. One day I decided not to run. And the police officers came, and this was the biggest police officer I've ever seen get out of a car before. He looked at me and kind of laughed and said, "You think you got a pretty good arm? Okay, come March, you're going to come and play for the Police Athletic League and play baseball." The gentleman who was running the Police Athletic League baseball team at the time was a guy named Mr. D. That's all we knew him at the time was Mr. D. He kind of took me under his wing and taught me how to play baseball and taught me how to be a gentleman, taught me to respect people, to respect women, taught me how to open doors for people. All those things that you really learn from a father, but I didn't have a father to learn from. And so he taught me all those things. And then a few years later, and I sent him a letter after I found that out, a few years later he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. So it was a pretty cool experience, but it was something that I learned from, that everything isn't what it looks like on the outside. So, take people for what they tell you, and I was blessed with being able to, a lot of people put me on their shoulders to carry me out of the place that I came from to where I'm today. After college, I went into the military, and then I met my wife in college, and so she was going to law school at Willamette University in Salem. We moved down there. I went to community college and got my welding certification. I knew I needed a trade besides college wasn't going to do any good for me. I felt so I needed a trade, so I got a trade as a welder, became a welder, and one day in the gym, this guy walks up to me and says, "Hey, you should be a cop." And I said, "I don't want to be a police officer." I said, "I got a good job, I'm making good money." And he hounded me for weeks and weeks and weeks. So finally I took the test just to get him off my back. I took the test, things went well, and I said to myself, I can always weld, but let me try this out. It seemed something new, something fresh. And Mr. D always told me, don't be one of those guys who complains, be one of those guys who wants to make change. So that's why I became a police officer. And ever since then, it's been a blessing. When I first started, Portland was growing. It was growing faster. It was growing as one of the fastest growing cities in the country at the time, in the early 2000s and in the late 1990s. So it was growing, it was changing, the dynamics were changing, but it was becoming a popular city to live in. With that came a lot of changes, came a lot of, more crime, but also more challenges. But the city was growing so fast and things were growing so fast, they were building. There were so many advantages to living here. People wanted to come here. In the summertime, it's beautiful here, so people wanted to come in and live in the city of Portland with all those opportunities. Obviously, one of the most memorable days, or one of the days I'll never forget, I should say, was 9/11. I was working night shift downtown, and we were coming into the precinct. It was almost time for shift to change, and we got a message over our radio that there was an explosion at the World Trade Center. And so obviously we all go down a little earlier, get into the roll call room and watching TV. And about 2 minutes into watching TV, we see the second plane hit. And we immediately knew it was a terrorist act. And we saw a country come together like they've never had before, around police officers, around firefighters, around citizens. And for many, many years after 9/11, we were still pulling everything back together, but the country was united with public safety, with law enforcement, and we were united with our communities. And it was the best time in my career. And so obviously I felt like this was what I was meant to do, and I had no qualms about the hard days, the tough days, the days that weren't fun. They're few and far between, but some days you say, I can't believe they paid me to do this job, and other days you say they couldn't pay me enough to do this job. The reason why I became a police officer, the reason why I continue to be a police officer, was because there are people in our communities that are vulnerable. There are people who need help. There are people who can't help themselves many times, and they need our help, and they expect our help, and they expect us to solve their problems. And so as I started to work districts, I started working a district called Old Town, which was downtown Portland. And that was probably primarily the only place in Portland you would see homeless people. There were a lot of missions down there. There were a lot of social services down there. And so I learned from officers before me to get out of my police car, to walk your district, to get to know everybody, the homeless people, the people who lived in subsidized housing, and the business owners. So I did that. I got out of my car every day and I walked my district. And it became my routine every day. And it was a good partnership and a great partnership with the community. Even the people who committed crimes, they still knew me, they respected me, I respected them, because the number one thing people want is respect. And so if you give people respect, you get a lot more back. So I felt that was pretty much my kind of trademark. I've worked in this community for 28 years as a public servant. So I have an investment in this community. I have an investment to see this community successful. I have an investment to see that they have all the resources that they possibly can have. And I care about this community. How can anybody walk away from people in need? How can anybody say no to a humanitarian effort like this? How can people say no when all these people, all these stakeholders have gotten together and figured out a way and a vision to be able to make this place what it should be and what it will be able to be? We want to make sure that it's the taxpayers' dollars are going to what it should be going to. And our political leaders need to understand that they need to be good stewards of the tax dollars of the people who roll up their sleeves every day and go to work and say, we're going to give you our money and trust you to do the best you can for people out there who need help.